The dress was still in my hands when the door closed. Not slammed, Renata was too controlled for slamming. She simply shut it, firmly, with the particular finality of someone who had rehearsed the moment. I stood on the front step of the house I had grown up in, a garment bag over one arm and a rolling suitcase I'd packed in under 10 minutes, and I listened to the deadbolt turn. 3 hours earlier, we had buried our father. My name is Delia Marsh, and for approximately 72 hours I was, as far as I understood, homeless and disinherited. That is where this story begins, not with grief, though there was plenty of that, but with a deadbolt and a dress and a driveway that smelled like cut grass and old stone, the way it always had in late October. Renata had told me before we even left the cemetery. Arms folded beneath her black coat, voice low enough that the other mourners couldn't hear. Dad restructured everything, she said. The attorney confirmed it this morning. The house, the firm, the accounts, all of it transfers to me. She had watched my face as she said it, the way you watch a screen when you're waiting for a reaction. I didn't give her one. I asked if I could see the documents. She said she'd have her people send them over. Then she got into the car. By the time I arrived at the house, my key no longer worked. I want to be precise about what my father built, because it matters to what comes next. Gerald Marsh started Marsh Capital Consulting as a 2-person operation out of a rented office near the waterfront. By the time I joined him 11 years ago, it had grown into something regional investors took seriously, but only barely. The systems were outdated. The reporting was inconsistent. He was brilliant at relationships and terrible at infrastructure, which is exactly where I came in. I am a financial operations consultant by training, which means I am the person companies call when the numbers are accurate but the processes that produce them are not. I spent 4 years rebuilding the internal architecture of my father's firm. Compliance frameworks, vendor contracts, audit trails, board documentation. I wrote most of the operating agreements myself. I knew where every number lived and why. Renata knew where the wine was kept and which clients liked to be taken to dinner. That was not nothing, but it was also not the same thing. She had borrowed money from the firm 3 times in the past 6 years. Each time, Dad had restructured it quietly, as a distribution rather than a loan, which I had flagged twice and been asked to leave alone. I left it alone. I was good at leaving things alone when he asked me to. I ended up at an extended stay hotel off the interstate, the kind with thin walls and a vending machine at the end of every hallway. I wasn't sure what I felt. Grief and shock occupy similar real estate in the body. Both render you very still and very cold. I sat on the edge of the bed with my coat still on, and went through the bag I'd grabbed on the way out. I hadn't planned to take it. It was a canvas tote I kept in the front closet, and I must have picked it up by habit. Inside, a legal pad, a charger, 2 old folders, and a manila envelope I didn't recognize. The envelope had my name on it in my father's handwriting. Inside was a single index card. 6 words, Ashford at Leland. Read before signing. I had heard my father mention Leland and Associates once, maybe twice, always in the context of estate planning. I had assumed that work was done and filed and would surface when it was meant to. Now I understood he had meant for it to surface sooner, or at least he had meant for me to know where to look. I did not sleep. I spent most of the night going through the folders, which contained old operating agreements, a property deed, and a signed amendment to a document I didn't have the first page of. The amendment referenced a conditional distribution structure. I read that phrase 4 times. Then I waited for morning. Leland and Associates occupied the 14th floor of a building downtown that had the particular hush of a place where serious money moved quietly. The receptionist asked if I had an appointment. I told her my father had been a client for 20 years and had died 3 days ago and that I needed to speak with someone named Ashford. She made a call. 3 minutes later, I was in. Martin Ashford was in his early 60s, with the manner of a man who had delivered difficult news so many times that he had learned to carry it without expression. He stood when I entered, which I noticed. He said, "You must be Delia. Not Miss Marsh. Not Gerald's daughter." He said my name like he had been expecting to use it. I sat down and told him what Renata had told me at the cemetery. He listened without interrupting. Then he set his hands flat on the desk and said, "Did she show you the will?" "She said she'd send the documents," I told him. He nodded slowly in the way that means, "Yes, I expected that." He opened a drawer and produced a bound document, tabbed and flagged. He slid it across the desk and said, "This is your father's final will. Executed 8 months ago. I am the filing attorney of record." I looked at the primary beneficiary line. My name. My full legal name spelled correctly. I looked up at him. He said, "Your father was thorough. There is a conditional distribution clause beginning on page 7. Your sister was designated as temporary administrator of the estate, with full transfer of assets contingent on one requirement that she demonstrate by act and conduct that she would provide for and include you in the transition." He paused. The condition had a 72-hour observation window, beginning at the moment the will was read. An independent witness was present at the cemetery, authorized to document conduct. I sat with that for a moment. "She failed it," I said. "It wasn't a question." He said, "The document you received, she was told to give it to you within the hour. You were supposed to read the will together at this office, the morning after the funeral. She did not bring you. Instead, according to the witness report, she changed the locks and removed you from the property." He looked at me evenly. "Your father anticipated exactly this. He built the clause because he believed she would make a choice, and he wanted that choice to be on record." I thought about the index card in the manila envelope. The 6 words. He had known. "What happens now?" I asked. Ashford said, "We verify the breach formally, which takes approximately 48 hours. Once confirmed, the estate transfers to you in full. No contest provision. Your sister can retain personal belongings and has 30 days to vacate the property." I asked him what he needed from me. He said, "Whatever you have." I had the voicemail she left me at the hotel. 2 minutes and 14 seconds of her explaining, in a tone she probably thought was measured, that I should not attempt to contact the firm's clients, that my access credentials had been revoked, and that I had no legal standing to dispute the transfer. I had 3 texts, the clearest of which read, "This house is mine now. Don't make this complicated." I had a photograph I hadn't planned to take, the deadbolt, the garment bag on the step, time-stamped. Each of these had felt at the time like a small wound. Sitting in Ashford's office, I understood they were something else. 49 hours later, I was back on that driveway. I had not called Renata. I had not sent a message or a warning. Ashford had advised against it, and I agreed, not for strategic reasons, but because there was nothing left to say in advance. A black sedan pulled up behind me. Ashford stepped out. Then a colleague. Then a woman I understood to be a process officer. The porch light was on. Same fixture. Dad had meant to replace the housing for 3 years. Ashford knocked. Renata answered the door in a cashmere sweater, holding a glass of something amber, and her expression moved through 3 phases in about 2 seconds: recognition, confusion, and then something I had never seen on her face before. A kind of vertical collapse from the eyes down. "What is this?" she said. Ashford introduced himself and stated his business in the calm, procedural way of someone for whom this is a Tuesday. He handed her the transfer document. She took it. Her hands were steady, but her color was not. She read. She said, "This isn't right." He said, "The condition was not met. The transfer is effective as of this morning." She turned to me. Her voice had changed register entirely, lower, faster, stripped of its usual architecture. "Delia," she said. "We can work this out." I was overwhelmed. I wasn't thinking. "You know how I get." I said, "I know exactly how you get." She said, "I'll fix it." "Tell him you want to fix it. Tell him we're fine." I looked at her for a moment, the way you look at something you've spent a long time trying to understand and have finally, without drama, understood. I said, "You changed the locks the same day we buried him." She started to say something. I didn't wait for it. I said, "I'm not doing this to you. You did it." I'm just here for the paperwork. Ashford gave the formal instruction to vacate. The process officer stepped slightly forward, not aggressively, just enough to indicate that the conversation had reached its administrative conclusion. Renata sat down on the arm of the couch, which I recognized as the same couch my father had fallen asleep on during every playoff game for 30 years. She looked smaller than I had ever seen her look. I did not feel satisfied by this. I want to be honest about that. What I felt was tired, and beneath the tired, something that took me several more weeks to name correctly, relief that the confusion was over. The legal work was completed by early evening. I drove back to the hotel, ordered food I barely ate, and sat for a long time not doing anything in particular. My father did not leave me the estate because he loved me more. I've thought about this carefully and I don't believe that was it. I think he left it to me because he understood something about both of us that he never said aloud, that I had spent 11 years learning how to spend what it produced. He wasn't punishing her. He was being accurate. The clause wasn't a trap. It was a last attempt to see if she'd surprise him. She didn't. Neither of us did in the end. We were both exactly who he already knew we were. I moved back into the house 6 weeks later, after the legal transition was complete. I kept the porch light fixture. I haven't replaced it either. Have you ever had someone show you who they are in a moment, so clear and so final, that you realize every prior confusion was just you hoping they were someone different, and has that clarity, when it came, felt less like winning and more like finally being allowed to stop?